Greyzone Warfare's next patch is right around the corner, and if you think you've seen it all with the 0.3 creator preview, there are in fact some changes already that are not currently in the streamer playtest that I'll tell you about, but we need to go through that in a moment. First and foremost, before we talk about anything else, we need to discuss when you can actually try this, because so far Madfinger have been very quiet on when players can actually try the game if you're not part of the creator test. Now I understand that's caused some consternation within the community, so I keep getting asked a billion times. The streamer preview ends today. Today is Wednesday the 21st, so after today, the creators who are in this early preview won't be able to play it anymore. Then, Madfinger have stated that drops on Twitch are going to start on the 22nd, so tomorrow on Thursday, based on the recording of this video, and Mara, the CEO and lead dev of Madfinger Games and of Greyzone Warfare, is going to be speaking at 5 PM my time in the UK, which is 12 o'clock midday Eastern time. So, even though they haven't given a specific date for the release, it sounds like it's going to be very, very soon, either tomorrow on Thursday, or it's going to be Friday, maybe just after that. We are going to have to see, because they haven't told us exactly when it's going to be, but given that the creator playtest seems to have gone pretty smoothly, I don't see any huge reason why they would want to delay it at this point, given the community's chomping at the bit to get involved. With that out of the way, I want to address some of the concerns that people have had with the game, and for those who have not been keeping up week to week with the development and the various dev blogs, and now that I've actually played it, I can actually tell you some of my thoughts about how it plays out. So the first one is about optimization and graphics. Within a game, there's really two important things that make the game playable. First is the gameplay itself, and second is the optimization. If you don't have either of these two things, people are just not going to play it. You can have the best game in the world, but if it doesn't run very well, then no one's going to actually enjoy their time within the game world. And vice versa, you can have the best running game ever, but if there's no game loop, then people also are not going to play. So optimization was a massive problem for Greyzone when it first released. They've been slowly improving this over time. And I know last time when the devs were speaking, then Mara was talking about having this potato mode, which they were joking about. And from my experience so far, it seems like the low settings in game now are much more impactful than they were before. So if you are on a lower end system, then you can shove a load of the settings down onto low to decrease the quality and increase your FPS. Kind of hard for me to test that, although I know that Clementine, who's basically my favorite optimization and testing of software and settings creator on YouTube, who does a lot of stuff for Tarkov, he's also looking at this on Greyzone, and he does have a relatively powerful machine with a 7800 X3D and a 4070 Ti Super, which is the same GPU that I have, and pushing everything onto low settings and including the frame gen, which we'll speak about in 1 second, he actually managed to get to his monitor refresh cap of 240 Hz, which was pretty insane. That would definitely not have been possible before. So all of that brings me on to the main point about optimization, is that the game runs better than it used to. And for me, it's night and day, because previously, so on a 5800 X3D, and as I said, the 4070 Ti Super, which is what I have, which is basically a mid to high-ish end PC, I used to get about 45 to 50 frames in the base game without using any frame gen technology. And I've been frame gen's biggest hater, because every time I used it, I got huge input lag. So yes, my frames jumped from 45-50 up to about 85-ish, but that decreased with scopes to start with, and secondly, the input lag even normally meant that I really didn't feel like I could use it. Now, Greyzone has been updated with some extra stuff, especially over on the Nvidia side. We now have DLSS 4 and all of the technology that comes with that, and my base frame rate has now gone up to about 60, I would say. It depends where I am, 60, 65, something like that, but I can now use frame gen, and I can't notice the input lag at all. This has put me up to 100 at least in almost all situations, and sometimes up to 115 FPS. The game feels completely different to how it did when I last playtested it seriously, which really was around the 0.1 when they initially launched the game. So in summary about optimization, the base frame rate using the same settings is now higher, and you now have more levers to pull if you need to increase the frame rate if you're on a weaker PC. So these two things mean that way more people who gave up on the game early because of the way that it played and the low FPS will now actually be able to play the game and not have that get in the way of their experience. I do want to point out that despite Madfinger updating Greyzone Warfare to use DLSS 4, the transformer model that they're using for DLSS itself, which is the one, if you remember from Tarkov, we got them to update it so that you could pick the drop down in game. You have basically models from A through to K, K being the latest one, which is the most sophisticated transformer model. That's not being used by default in Greyzone Warfare at the moment. I'm sure that they will either change it or add a drop down at some point, but you can actually change this in the Nvidia app yourself, and it gives a much clearer picture. This helps with the frame gen as well, to stop it artifacting basically, and I stick mine on quality most of the time, because that gives me a decent frame rate and also looks pretty good. One other final thing to note about graphics before we move on is remember that if you update your graphics drivers or you change stuff, sometimes you're going to need to update your shaders. If you see this icon up in the top right hand corner of the screen and low FPS, that's because the game is caching new shaders, which happens in a lot of games that are on Unreal 5 now just because of the way it works. So if you see that shaders thing up there, just give it a little bit of time. It won't need to recache in that area again until you reinstall your graphics drivers and update them, for example. So once you've gone to a few different areas, then you won't see that performance hit anymore. Alright, so in terms of the actual gameplay loop itself, one of the other criticisms of the original versions of Grey Zone on 0.1 and also of 0.2 as well, because that only really added the night mode, is not having enough to do. Because really, all there was to do is to go and quest in a similar vein to Escape from Tarkov. Now, there's a few things that the Grey Zone devs have done here which have improved it, which I talked a little bit about in the last video, but now that I've had a chance to play with it, I've got a much more detailed understanding of exactly how the system has changed and what the impact that might be when it comes to a full wipe. So of course I'm talking about the COP system, which is the combat outpost system, and these are interspersed amongst the LZs. You've got level 1 COPs, which are just small outposts, level 3 COPs, which are bigger and harder to take back, and usually on some kind of fortified or advantageous position like up a mountain or something, and these make the map so much more rich. There are also more points of interest just across the map in general, and with this kind of faction territory game going on about this capturing and recapturing COP points back from other people, this kind of changes the game a lot. Rather than having to fly all the way across the map, if you die in some remote location and you've taken a COP nearby, you can then respawn at that COP point. But obviously other players from the enemy team might be coming to try and take it back. So there's this kind of tug of war between whether you want to take the COP or take it back and fight over the COP itself, whether you want to try to leave it and then go into the hotspot or do whatever quest it was that you actually wanted to do. So there's now these multiple layers over the top where the factions are vying for these COP points to be able to get an advantageous respawn if they die in one of the areas with higher loot. This is overlaid with the PvP combat zones, which again I talked about last time and I had a little play around with. You can get these to appear just by shooting at enemy COPs, and they do appear between you and the enemy. So you can maybe sometimes bait with them in some ways. You can fire a few shots, make a PvP combat zone, and then you can flank and rotate around to mislead the enemy into where you might actually be coming from, for example. But there are some issues with the COP system that are being addressed. So respawning at the moment is very, very strong. For example, if you are attacking a COP and somebody is there defending it and they die, they can respawn almost instantaneously back at that exact same COP because that's the closest one to where they died, and there's no blocking mechanics at the moment, so they can run straight back to their body and pick up all their gear, meaning that you sometimes have to kill people multiple times, which is very frustrating. So respawning is a bit strong, and the same with accessing the traders and stash under fire. I know people were saying things like they're under fire on the COP and you can literally just buy grenades from the trader and just chuck them at the enemy, which is a bit insane in terms of defense. Based on this feedback, the Grey Zone Warfare devs are actually changing some stuff that I can tell you about now. So COP points can now become contested, and this is basically when any of the AI that is part of your own team's faction is either alert, alarmed, or dead. So if any of your AI faction are dead, or they're running around, they're on high alert because they've been shot at, that's when a COP point becomes contested. And this is actually going to take quite a while, I think, because according to what they've said so far, if any of the AI have been killed and are currently not alive, the COP remains contested until that AI respawns again. So it's going to take quite a while for that COP to go back into a kind of neutral state. What this will mean, once this is in effect, is that player respawns will be blocked. So if you then die within that COP point, you won't be able to respawn back at that COP specifically. So it's kind of a one life game, right? The attackers have one life because they're going to have to respawn further away, and you've only got one life because if you die, you won't be able to respawn back at that COP again. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to interact with the trader and stash access at these COP points. Maybe something will be done about that as well based on the feedback when it actually does go live. For now, the respawn block is definitely a good step. Another piece of feedback that is actually being implemented for the release of 0.3, whenever it ends up coming, is about the voiceover from the faction announcer, which at the moment is way too much. There's just way too much chatter over the radio, and it makes it very difficult to hear. And also you get told about things that are happening all the way across the other side of the world. So along with this contested COP system, there's also some changes to the voiceover as well from the faction announcer. So the voiceover only triggers when a COP is contested, captured, or lost, and if you're within 1.5 kilometers of the COP. So you're not going to hear about something across the whole other side of the map. Likewise with the PMC conflict zones, they are quite cool, but the voiceover now is only going to trigger when a conflict zone is created and you're within 300 meters of that particular conflict zone. So you're not just going to hear about random PMC engagements across the rest of the map. Hopefully this is going to cut down a lot on the radio chatter, which probably is the #1 piece of feedback that has come out of the playtest so far, that it just needs to be reduced by a significant margin. So we'll see how that plays out. Hopefully it'll be a lot better. While I do like the way that the cop system plays at the moment, it still feels like a little bit of an aid to questing, which is really the sort of main gameplay loop. I don't know what Madfinger are intending to do with the cop system at this point, whether they want to lean more into it or whether they want to leave it as it is, just as a tool for doing the rest of the game. But I can think of some really amazing ways that the game could actually lean even further into the cop system to create some kind of territorial factional battle. I do think, though, that to make it really interesting, there do have to be other mechanics over the top, such as cops are linked together in some particular way and are only fully functional if they're linked, with some kind of supply line or something. I was thinking maybe that would be based on the main base, but that seems a little bit too rigid, so perhaps a cop has to be linked to the level 3 cops. You could take a level 3 cop over, and then the smaller cops could be linked to that, but they're not fully functional if they're not linked, for example, something along those lines. Or a completely new system where cops generate influence points, which is probably the one that I like the most, and those influence points let you do stuff with the local bandits, so either stage attacks on other cops owned by other factions. You then would have AI attacking your own cops as well, and they could potentially be upgraded and that kind of thing using these cop points. So I think a system like that could be really, really nice. The only thing that I'm a little hesitant about it is that I don't necessarily want to turn this game fully into squad, where you have to have people doing logistics and taking materials back from the main base up towards the cops. I think a system should focus more on offense, and the actual influence of the cops themselves would be what gives you the resource rather than having to ship stuff about, because it kind of forces people into a logistics role, and I'm just not really sure if that's what this game is about fundamentally. The reason why I really like the idea of cop influence, though, is that the game is called Grey Zone Warfare, and that really does lean into what the game is supposed to be about. It's not really about 3 militaries fighting each other in a classic army style way. It's supposed to be underground operations, people bribing each other. It's the grey zone of warfare. So if you're bribing bandits to go and attack the other factions, or to go and spy on them to find out, how many resources they have at their own cop points, things like that, that could actually be really, really interesting and lean into what the devs actually have intended for the game. So enough about the cops, let's move on to the next point, which is about the AI, because a lot of people have struggled with the AI a lot. It is still pretty lethal, and I did have some situations where I got one-tapped by them, but I would say that it feels way, way better than it did. It is a night and day difference. The ballistics work a lot better, they've added tumbling for the various rounds, and after using a plethora of different guns from the SVD to the MCX, the M4, the MP7, and even shotguns, which are really, really good in the starter town, by the way. Probably remember that one for when 0.3 drops. I'm finding the TTK way better in most places around the map against the AI. This is also true for PMCs as well, but the AI is a night and day difference. The other part about it that makes AI feel way better to fight is the feedback. We looked at this before, and the devs gave some clips of what that looked like. So when an AI gets shot, you can visibly see them actually react to it properly. They're not just a robot that then just shoots back. They limp around, they try to get into cover, they actually look like they're hurt. And that feedback actually really helps to feel that your shots are connecting and that you're actually doing damage to them. As I said, there will still be times where you get one-taps. You either get shot in the head from a very long way away, especially against the PMC AI at the cops, which I did have happen to me once or twice. And also there can be surprises, especially in the starter town, because those AI are typically using hollow point or soft point bullets. And one time I got clipped on the very side of my chest, and the cavity that it created actually went behind my armor and killed me by destroying my lung, which was quite annoying, but that tends to happen more so with the starter town enemies than elsewhere, where they tend to have some kind of intermediate armor piercing round. The fourth main point and huge improvement that has come to the game is about the questing. Now, this is a little bit interesting because we don't fully know from the creator preview exactly how this is going to play out. The creator preview started with everybody at level 4 traders, and we had access to a lot of money and all of the gear in the game, so we didn't really need to quest. I went to just go and do a few of them just to see how it felt with the new system, and I think between the cop mechanic and the way that questing works now, this is really going to change the way that the flow of the game feels. Previously, it was a fly on the helicopter back and forth from the main base simulator, but now that they've changed it so that you can hand in tasks that don't have actual items in raid, this means that you can then just go from task to task to task if you're equipped for it. For example, when you first start off, you have a mission to go and scout 3 separate locations in the world. You go to the gas station, you go to the lumber mill, and then you find one of the buildings on the outskirts. Once you've done that, you basically just send the trader a text message on your mobile phone saying you've done it, and he says, okay, you've completed the quest, here's the next one. And they say, fine, now you need to go and visit the Black Hawk. So rather than having to go back to base, you're still in raid, and you go, well, I'm at the gas station, that was my final one, now I can just go and find the helicopter. helicopter. So you turn up at the helicopter, and then you send them a message saying, well, the pilot was killed in action, but I don't see the crew. They send you a message back saying, okay, check the nearby buildings. They can't have got too far. So you check the nearby buildings, you go in, and you find the final guy. And then you send another message to the trader saying, I found the rest of the crew. They're all dead. They say, okay, that's a real shame, but that's the end of the mission. We can't do anything else at this point. And then you get given the next one. So rather than having to go back and forth from base all the time, a lot of these quests, especially the information gathering ones, they can be completed in raid itself. And that gives you a lot more flexibility about what to do in what order and how to go about planning your missions so you're not just doing one thing at any one time. It is way, way, way better. And when combined with the cop system, this means that if you do die, then if you've got a cop captured nearby, and this is even more important if you're far from your main base, you don't need to take the chopper back because you respawn back at the cop. When 0.3 comes through and everybody gets wiped and we're having to start again with the starter missions and the cop system, I think this is going to fundamentally change the way that the game plays out, because the cops and the questing system kind of interact together. And if you're only doing one, the cops, like we were, without doing the questing, then you're kind of missing part of the gameplay. I think together they're probably better than they are individually as systems, if that makes sense. For those of you who are slightly antsy about spending 5 hours in the starter town again, which is apparently how long it used to be, they've also streamlined the quests there as well, partly because of this mechanic, and now it takes a little bit under 2 hours to complete them. So it's about 40% of the time to get all of that stuff done based on how it used to be. This means that new players can still get a good grounding, but experienced players can whiz through it more quickly and then get onto the more interesting missions further afield. So where to go from here? Look out over the next day or two for the update for 0.3. Go and give it a try yourself and see how it feels on your system. I would love to see Madfinger include more updates to the cop system over the top of what we've got already, upgrading cops, repairing them, generating influence points, giving you kind of cop actions where you can influence the local bandits to go and do stuff for you to really move into that grey zone kind of feel, but without making it feel as if you need a whole sort of squad tactical commander and a logistics setup to play the game. I don't feel like that's necessarily the right way to go on a full, almost, RTS type level. But I'm open to lots of suggestions. I really want to try to put together something good, and based on the feedback of my own community, at least what people would like to see in the game. So I'm all ears. If you have suggestions, just leave them down in the comments and I will definitely read them. So if you haven't seen my original video telling you everything that's coming, including all the new weapons and that kind of thing, go and watch the video before this, which I'll link here. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.